Good afternoon and welcome to the Lunchtime series with me, Britz, leading the charge with insights, information, and ultimately effective results. Joining me in our leadership and coaching segment today, she's been named one of 2025's top 30 global gurus for leadership along with Simon Sinek and John Maxwell. So when she talks, her clients listen. And as an advisor to boards, owners, and C-suite teams, she's a leadership, strategic, and succession planning consultant and author and speaker. Please welcome to the show, Liz Wilson. Liz, how you doing?
Hi, Kevin. Nice to be here with you.
Yeah, it's great to have you on the show. But before we go there, don't you just want to give us a bit of background?
Well, thank you. So it was in the top 30, and it was. I have to tell you, Kevin, it was a complete surprise. I didn't know anything about it. I was actually in California. I was working, and I was out for a walk, and I happened to check my phone, and I started getting some LinkedIn notifications, and other people were including me in their list for even being in the top 30, and it was a very nice surprise. It was quite an honor and a nice surprise. So, for your listeners, what I do, I'm Liz Weber. I am a business advisor, executive coach, and primarily do three things with my clients. So the first thing I do is I work with business owners, leadership, the C-suite or boards of directors in strategic planning, in that I facilitate their strategic planning initiatives through retreats or multi-series work sessions. As part of those conversations, Kevin, you and your listeners can well imagine when we're talking about where do you need to take your company over the next 3, 5, 10 or more years? We get into conversations as to, well, who's going to do that work? So we get into workforce and succession planning conversations about who future leaders need to be, might be, who team members need to be, and what talents do you need to have on your team to be successful. And then the third thing that I do and spend a good bit of my time doing now is serving as a business advisor, executive coach, either one-on-one or with executive teams or boards, to really help them think through current situations that they're facing, to look at it more from a 360 perspective. And it's quite often a benefit to them to have an outside perspective, because even the most well-run organizations at times can get a bit myopic, particularly with my clients that are smaller. It's a value to them to have an outside voice, because many of my clients who are business owners or who are in the C-suite just don't have anybody internally they can talk to. There are just some things like, I've got Kevin on my team, and he's a CFO, and he's a real pain in my neck. It's kind of some of those conversations we have about how do you overcome some of the personality conflicts in the C-suite and be a better leader, because you can't take those conversations to your HR person. It's just not appropriate. So that's what I do.
Yeah, I love it. It's when we first chatted, one of the things that you sort of posed as the line that you often experience when people share job roles and responsibilities, and one of the first lines that you mentioned that a lot of people just don't sort of clarify is when was the first time you heard that line of "and any other duties as needed"? Take us through that and why that conversation.
Sure, absolutely. When I'm working with my clients, whether it's one-on-one or if I'm doing a leadership seminar or workshop with them, or talking about transforming culture and enhancing engagement, one of the conversations that we get into is individually and also as a leader. I believe it's really important that you help every team member understand their responsibility given the jobs they have and the roles they have and the money they're being paid to do those roles. So here in the US, when you have a job, quite often you have a position description or a role responsibility or whatever you want to call it. And you have this document that lists the different responsibilities you have, the different attributes you should have, the different capabilities you should have to do that job. And it kind of lists them in a whole row of different things. And it also lists the things that you should be able to do given the job that you have. And invariably here in the US, the last item in that list says something along the lines of, and any other duties as assigned. And what happens here is, historically, some managers have interpreted that line to mean, I can get you to do anything I want you to do. And it's kind of warped. And sadly, many employees, when they hear that line, they flinch also, because it's like, well, you can get me to do anything that you want. And that's kind of, like dictatorial. And what I do with my clients is, first off, when I share that at a training program or a conference, I will tell you, Kevin, there's this uncomfortable laugh that ripples through the audience, because managers and employees know exactly that feeling. Any other duties as assigned, I don't even have to say it. I can say, what's that last line on position descriptions? And the people in the audience will say it. So we all know it. So when I work with my clients to get rid of that uncomfortable feeling and warped understanding of what that line really is I suggest they rewrite it. And they rewrite it to any other duties as needed to drive to the vision, fulfill the mission, and abide by the values of this organization. Now that's different. Because what that does is, now, if I'm your manager, Kevin, and we have a dignitary coming to our facility tomorrow afternoon because they're going to give us some big award, and everything is great, but we just had some construction out in our back parking lot, and it's still not really looking really well. What I might do is I might ask you and everybody else on the team, hey guys, can we go outside for 45 minutes and just pick up this mess out there and make it look good, because, we've got so-and-so big shot coming tomorrow. Now, cleaning up part of the parking lot is not typically part of your job description, but we all know, given this situation, given this award that's coming our way, given the people that are going to come, all of us are going to go do something over and above. And that's the intent of a line like that, is there will be times when I'm going to request or ask, or we're all going to be asked to do things that aren't finely limited to our, direct scope of responsibilities that are on our position description, but that go out those boundaries a little bit to help us move the mission forward and really be a strong team player.
And I love that, you sort of steer it back to the vision and the mission and the values that we hold, because then there's still, and reframing it, because then there's still a sort of direction of why putting that line in is okay. But I think very often it's left quite vague, and it some people may actually take advantage of the fact that, they've left it vague. So I think the reframe is such an essential part of, when you use that line and any other duties as needed, there should be a reframe just to tweak it so that it is in alignment with those things for an organization.
Absolutely. And I'll just add one more thought to that. This really works only when you as a leader have focused on your vision, mission, and values, and actually talk about them, and actually work in incorporating them into who you are as an organization and who you are as a leader, and what you hold your team members accountable to. If you don't care about your vision, mission, and values, if you don't abide by them yourselves, well, then putting that line in is meaningless. It's actually going to be counterproductive. So, I'm glad you raised that, because it reminds me to make that point. If you're going to make that change, then make sure it's consistent with who you are as a leader and what you are doing to create a culture that actually focuses everyone on the includes everyone in the mission, and then ensures everyone is accountable to the values. Because if you don't, it's not going to work.
And from a leadership perspective, I suppose because we do what we do, it goes without saying. Like, yeah, like it's supposed to be in alignment. But from your experience, Liz, I'm like just thinking about some of the misinterpretation, and I'm thinking part of that it could potentially lead to mindsets for leaders who potentially misinterpret stuff like this phrase. And also, depending on the mindset of the organization, or the culture for that matter, of the organization, could actually use that in a very manipulative way. So speak to us about some of your experiences on how misinterpreting information, and also some of those abuses that you've come across where leaders kind of just, take advantage of things that are misconstrued or left for your own judgment.
Well, I think you raise a really important point. And again, it's something that I talk with my clients about, particularly those who are stepping into the role of a leader. Maybe it's a new CEO, or maybe it's someone who's taking over a division, or they're whatever reason they're new into their role, whatever it might be in the C-suite or even just a mid-level manager. And one of the conversations I encourage them to have with their teams right away is their interpretation, to exactly your point, of if they are the CEO of the company, their interpretation of the vision, to make sure that it is in alignment with what the team believes or had believed from the previous CEO. And if they are changing the focus, they need to articulate how they are changing direction and changing focus again. So the team all knows this is now the direction we're heading in. And that enables the team members to decide, do I want to be on this journey with them now that they shifted focus, or don't I? And that is a key deciding point and a key question for team members. But to your point, I think it's important that a CEO clarify what is the vision from your perspective. Then the same thing happens with the mission. Again, every one of my clients who steps into their new role, I have them have a conversation with their new team and discuss what they believe the mission is, and get the input from their team members of what are we here to do together. Let's get an understanding of that. And within that mission, what is my job? And what is each of your jobs in moving this vision or this mission forward and fulfilling this mission? And kind of resetting that understanding is crucial. And the third step is having a discussion about the values, and I call those the house rules. These are the non-negotiables. These are the behaviors day in and day out that I need to be accountable for and I need to embody and live. And these are the same values that you need to embody and live. And here's the kicker, Kevin. As long as we're taking a paycheck from this company, by default, we agree to abide by the values to help fulfill the mission and drive to the vision. That's our exchange for our paycheck. So if we don't agree with the direction that this company or organization is now going, if we're no longer happy with the mission, and if the values have suddenly taken a left-hand turn, we can go, I'm out. This is not what I wanted. But the new leader then has his or her clarity of where they think they want to go with this organization. And I think that's what's really important, is that reset, because then people are going, hey, this is not what I signed up for. I'm out, or I don't like the new direction that you're taking it, or hey, this is the direction I've always wanted to go. I'm so glad we're going in this direction. So I think it's a really important step for any new leader or any leader after a while to reiterate, where are we headed, and how are we going to get there? And do you want to be on this journey with us or not?
Yeah, and it's so interesting as you're speaking through that. One of the things that comes to mind is the importance of communication. Just recently, in the last 2 weeks, I've been working with a team of leaders, and part of what we were unpacking to a large degree was the importance of communications, but also, how does communication sometimes get skewed? And part of that is biases and intention versus behavior, and what are you intending versus what it is you're actually communicating. What do you see as some of those triggers? Because very often, I mean, I'll give you a simple example. One of the leaders started unpacking the insights, and I always call it like they were speaking higher grade. It sounded like they were speaking about how they would implement. And until I got back to it, I was like, I don't want to interrupt, but I wanted, like, what are you actually going to do? Like, what is the practicality of what you're doing? Because you're speaking higher grade, and you kind of like, I don't understand. Like, how do you take all of that information down to implementable, practical approaches, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm thinking, obviously communication is so key, bringing it back to having those team meetings and connecting with people to understand their version of what they understand, what you think they understand, right? So what are some of those triggers that you've also noticed that teams simply are, it's almost like they get it wrong, or it's triggered in a way that you don't intend?
It's really somewhat ironic that you asked that question, because last week, I can't tell you the number of conversations I had about The challenges so many leaders are facing right now is, number one is just volume of work and, not enough people to do it. And because of that, there's just so much information coming at every leader all the time that the quality of the communication is more important than ever. Because, Kevin, if you send me, let's say you send me an email and it's just type all over the place. I am not going to go, oh yay, I get to read another email from Kevin. I'm going to go, oh gosh, what does he want now? And I may read part of it, or I might just skip over it and jump to something that's easier for me to handle and get off my plate. So I say that because to your question about, communication and kind of moving things forward and the challenges that leaders are having, again, a couple of things. I want to back up on communication and go back to vision, mission, values that we talked about. One of the reasons when I'm working with my clients in the strategic planning project in creating their vision, mission, and values is we spend a good time getting nitpicky on wording. Because from my perspective with clients, when we craft a vision statement that is good, if you weren't in that planning room and you hear the vision, you still understand it. You don't have to have been part of all those conversations to go, oh, yeah, I know what you're trying to do. You should be able to immediately understand it and start having some immediate thoughts of what does this organization or what might I have to do to help move towards that. It needs to be that clear. Vision is a picture, it's an image. You need to see it in your mind's eye. And the same thing for mission and values. Number one, we get picky in being clear in what we are putting in front of our teams and expecting them to understand and work towards. The second thing that we do then to this whole idea about communication, because it's so easy to get convoluted as it passes from person to person. And we all know, Kevin, you could be the CEO and I could be one of your VPs, and you tell all of us to go communicate this great new vision that we all came up with. And if there are 8 people on your senior management team, there's going to be 8 different interpretations going out to our different teams. None of us are going to say it exactly the same way you do. And so because of that, I also really strongly encourage, and more often than not now, every quarter after one of my clients' plans go live, I circle back with him every quarter to check in. Number one, how's it going as far as the rollout? But more importantly, what is being communicated out and what is being communicated back up, and how do we need to adjust the communication plan so that every single department is singing from the same song sheet, so every employee is hearing the same thing. The other thing that I'm really encouraging with my clients, and I've only started this recently, is to implement more skip level meetings so that we can ensure that if there are breaks in communication, we're able to catch them sooner and able to provide targeted support to our managers who aren't communicating down properly. And so there's just a number of different ways to kind of track communication to see how things are, number one, being communicated out. And if they're communicated out properly, are they then being able to be implemented properly? And people are able to identify how do we need to implement this because they're very clear on what the objectives need to be and what the outcomes need to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why, like you say, I think the word convoluted comes to mind when the communication just isn't completely sound. And like you say, if you weren't in that room, it should be clear enough to absolutely 100% understand what it is being communicated. But in terms of power dynamics and culture, that one line that you shared with us, what does that reveal about organizational culture, especially around hierarchy, agility, and empowerment? Because I think we've covered some of it, but sometimes it can suggest that at some level someone's not taking accountability. So what does it suggest about culture, and why is it important to even raise this conversation as an importance?
Well, it kind of, I think I would kind of circle back to what we were discussing earlier. And in order for that line to have the powerful effect that we'd like it to have, you have to have done some work ahead of time to create a culture that does a couple different things. Number one, first and foremost, make sure that every single employee, and I mean every single employee, understands the vision, mission, and values of the organization. and more importantly, understands they're not just touchy-feely nice things. You actually believe in them. This is part of the backbone of the organization. Number two, once you have that understanding, number two, there has to have been some consistency and some opportunities where team members have seen leaders hold themselves and hold others accountable to the values and accountable to not abiding by them or fulfilling the mission or driving to the vision, causing delays. And that's one of the reasons why I've said I suggest these quarterly update meetings, because those quarterly update meetings, quicker than anything I've ever experienced in the 33 years I've been in business, Kevin, those quarterly update meetings, typically within 2 quarters, I will see dramatic changes in the way a leadership team behaves with one another, the quality of the communication, the camaraderie within the meeting venue of what's happening and why, because they're reporting out on the plan. They're all accountable to each other because we're all reporting what's working, what's not, what's coming next. And that starts changing the tone, the tenor, the accountability, and more importantly, in many cases, the pace. The pace starts picking up dramatically because now we've got clarity and alignment and everybody is clear on what's happening next. So some of those dynamics, it starts shifting culture, and you have to want to be a leader who's going to enable that type of culture where you can't be an authoritarian and do it all yourself and muzzle everybody. This is where you really have to be comfortable in empowering the leadership level below you and the one below that and the one below that to do their jobs as a leader and to ensure that their team members all understand how they fit in, what they're accountable to, and what they're accountable for, and the timeline that you're all working on. And the other thing then is give them a voice. When they don't understand, do you have an environment that allows them to ask questions when they don't understand? When there is a success, do you have a culture that supports them and acknowledges them and gives them accolades when they have a success? Similarly, when there's a major mess up, how do you handle it? Do you publicly humiliate them? Or do you say, what did we learn from this? And how do we move forward? Now, if it was an intentional, egregious mistake, well, obviously there's a different action you take. But the type of culture that you create that is going to either enable or punish individuals for making mistakes or speaking up, that's gonna affect your culture, and that's gonna affect your ability to use that and drive to the vision, fulfill the mission, abide by the values line, either effectively or not. It's all tied together. It's all got to be tied together.
Yeah, and I think that's why, as you mentioned, it circles back to the fundamentals of what the business is about. Part of, if it tapers down to the degree where people simply are not understanding or it's been miscommunicated, it should come back as a process of accountability to the leaders, kind of going, therefore, I haven't shared it clearly enough. You could make the assumption as like, where is the lack of accountability of why is this not being effectively communicated to that degree so that the ship actually moves in the direction that it's intended to move and not kind of sort of maybe
Right.
and rather quite intentional.
Right. I'll tell you, it's interesting. Again, just last week, I was working with a client talking about communication because they just got their results from engagement survey. And, one of the items was, we don't know what's going on. Leadership never tells us anything. And so in working with the CEO of this organization, she shared with me her plan for addressing this. In one of the things that she had listed in her plan was creating a policy of when and how leaders should communicate. And in looking at her proposed plan, I kind of went back because she sent it to me in a Word document. And so I was editing it, going back, and I said, wouldn't it make more sense before you create a policy that instead we spend some time helping your leaders learn how to have one-on-one meetings with team members, but also how to run better meetings with team members? Because some of the other comments in the engagement survey are things like, I never get feedback. I don't know what's going on. Our management meetings are a waste of time. So what if instead we started teaching some skills that to you and me might seem pretty basic, but goodness knows you and I have sat in how many awful meetings in our careers that if we instead spend some time teaching our managers, here are some of the things that you could talk about in a one-on-one meeting or a team meeting. And one of those things that you can communicate out is, how are we doing as a team, or how are you doing as an individual in moving the respective things that you or we are responsible for moving forward that feed into the strategic plan? I mean, that can be part of the conversation. And then to kind of loop it back to things that we've already discussed in our conversation here is, then it's a matter of, when do you have those conversations and how do you feed that then back up in the hierarchy so they know what is being communicated, but also what questions there are. And what I mean by that is, if the leadership team is meeting every quarter to talk about, where are we on the plan, what's happening, what do we need to do, what do we need to adjust, and how do we need to communicate this out so people know what's coming next for the next quarter, the next 3 quarters, whatever it might be, you and your team need to meet before that. You need to get ahead of that meeting so you have all your information so you can, number one, feed it up to the executive team or the planning team, along with not only the status of the different initiatives that you and your team are responsible for, but the challenges that you and your team are facing possibly in implementing some of those initiatives, and what you need of them to help clear roadblocks so you can move forward. So when they go into their planning meetings and they have all this information, they can deal with things, they can adjust the plan timelines if they need to, and then they can feed those changes back down to you. And then you, in your next meeting with your team, can communicate that information with them. So it's a matter of, number one, creating a cadence for communication up and down and out into your team. But before that, it's just simply also getting really fundamental and asking, do I, as a leader, actually know how to have a comfortable and informative and helpful conversation one-on-one with my team members? And do I, as a leader, know how to actually run a good meeting so that when my team says, oh, we're having a team meeting, then I'll go, oh, God. Instead, it's like, okay, hey, team meeting. And they're not, looking forward to it, but they don't dread it because they know we're going to get things done. We're going to make some decisions. Information's going to be shared in a way that couldn't have just been shared in a Slack message or a text or whatever it might be. So again, it's a matter of getting clear in, what do you need as a leader for your team to understand and do differently? And then how do you go about adjusting your behaviors and your delivery mechanisms to make that happen?
I love that you've broken it down to, to such fundamentals and the importance of that cycling back. But as you were speaking through this, Liz, considering that this is still things that organizations currently and, very often go through, one of the questions that raises its head is, why are we getting it so wrong? Why are leaders getting it so wrong so often? And as you say, can you run a really good meeting? Do you know how to do that? Do you know how to engage with your team to a degree that it's not them dragging their feet along and they don't feel like this is just another meeting to attend? Like, why are we getting it so wrong? And what is the gap? What are we missing? What do you think?
That's a great question. And I can only speak from my observations with my client base on this. And what I see, Kevin, is number one, within my client base, there's been a big turnover in the last 5 years of leaders, in that a number of leaders were promoted up very quickly and much quicker than expected. And so they didn't have the luxury of being effectively mentored or trained. And so they're just kind of thrown into a role of great responsibility, um, and never having basic leadership skills or basic leadership training. So they're learning on the fly. And as you and I both know, quite often what we tend to do is what we've seen other people do or what we experienced. So if we were fortunate to have a good manager or managers in previous positions, we'll echo some of those behaviors. And if we had less than great, sometimes we'll overcompensate and do things far different than that poor manager did. And how we overcompensate is not helpful. And so we're just kind of making it up as we go. And I think for the best of intentions, a lot of leaders also are trying to provide people space because they know people are so busy, and are forgetting that without structure, people flounder. And so it's a need that we need to create enough structure that people know here's how we need to operate. You'll have a great deal of freedom within these boundaries, but given who we are as an organization, given what's expected of us, et cetera, you need to operate within these boundaries, within these rules, within these values, within these policies, procedures. But after that, you can go. And I think some people are just misinterpreting that when I put boundaries on, or I hold people accountable, that I'm somehow, limiting them, or I'm overstepping my authority. And it's a conversation I have repeatedly, that if you have this skewed perspective that if you hold people accountable, you're being mean, you don't understand what it means to be a good manager. Being a manager is not being mean. Being a manager is setting expectations and boundaries, and then clearing roadblocks so your team members can succeed, setting up challenges and growth opportunities, and supporting them in those challenges and growth opportunities to be the best they can be and leverage themselves and leverage the work of others. That's your job. And if you think it's being mean by informing Kevin that this is now the third day in a row he's missed the deliverable that's expected, and if he wasn't aware what the timeline is, then I don't think you understand your role as a manager. So either he didn't know what the timeline was, we have to figure out why he didn't know what the timeline was, or if he didn't think it was important, we need to enlighten him on why it's important he needs to hit his deadlines, because that's impacting this, and this down the pipeline. So it's an educational opportunity more than a situation of being mean to somebody.
Yeah. So there's a part of leadership evolution as we see it in the world today. Is what is your take on that one line, that and any other duties as needed? What is your take on how that works in an entrepreneurial kind of environment versus corporate leaders? Is there a difference? Do you think it applies differently? Do you think it's context as well, depending on the company you're working in?
Oh, I think it absolutely could be. And it's, again, it kind of goes to, given the type of organization you are, how risk averse is the company? If the company wants you to be innovative and they want you to experiment and they want you to try, the line and any other duties as needed, well, that gives you, a full range of opportunities to do things. But if you work in an organization that is much less risk averse and much less open to mistakes and doesn't like people making mistakes because then it's all finger pointing, well, then that line is really going to limit you to only do what you are told to do. So, I think it's a great question, and it really is dependent upon the organization, the risk tolerance, and the willingness of the leadership team and the culture to accept individual initiative and to accept mistakes and learning from mistakes versus penalizing people for making mistakes.
Um, I love the conversation, and Liz, thanks for the insight. It's so fascinating to unpack it from your perspective. If we were to have a good metaphor for life on if any other duties as needed, what would that be? And how would you share that in a different way, just to frame it differently for people? And I know we started the conversation there, but if there's a takeaway from someone listening to the conversation, how could we position that so it sounds different and it's still meaningful?
I have never been asked that question. I think, Kevin, what I would say is do the right thing. Do the right thing. And I think it's one of those situations, again, it somewhat ties into what I was just saying about the risk tolerance of the organization. If you believe it's important that we all go out to the parking lot and clean up the rubbish that's in the parking lot, because that's the right thing to do, great. But if I'm now the manager and I was like, Kevin, what did you do? Why did you have them do that? And if
Yeah.
you can say, well, I thought that was the right thing to do, Okay. Or you're like, oh, if I'm open to risk and open to allowing you to take initiative, great. If I'm autocratic, I might not like that and I could still be angry about it. So I think it ties into, again, the culture of the organization, the risk tolerance of the organization, the willingness to allow individuals to, if they understand the vision, mission, and values, to do what they believe is the right thing to do to move them forward.
So if you could leave our audience today with just some top of the mind, very important insights on why this conversation is necessary, and to perhaps be careful and do the right thing, as you say, like, what would you leave the audience just today, just to and take away from today's conversation?
You said three things, and as soon as you said three, I thought of immediately vision, mission, and values. And I guess what I would encourage the listeners to do is to review your company's vision, mission, and values and ask yourself, are they serving us as well as they could in helping us create clarity in where we want this organization to go, in clarifying why we exist, what we do, and who we serve, and in clarifying our personality in the behaviors that we demonstrate and the values that we embody. Are they serving us well?
Yeah, and I think that's such a beautiful sort of summary of that. Is what we're doing is serving us well. Thank you, Liz. It has been such an absolute pleasure to have you and to unpack and understand your insights from this, because I think it's one line that we just usually just throw away as if it's not important, and yet it can carry such a weight. She's named one of the top 30 global gurus for, along with Simon Sinek and John Maxwell. And she's a leadership, strategic, and succession planning consultant, author, and speaker. Liz Wilson, thank you. Thank you for being here and just unpacking some insights with us around this conversation.
Thank you, Kevin. It's been fun.
If we need to get hold of you, what is the quickest way?
Two things I would recommend. I'm active on LinkedIn, Liz Weber CMC, and Weber has one B, or my website, which is wbsllc.com.
Fantastic, guys. And the links will be in the description box below. So join us every Wednesday and Thursday on the Lunchtime series from myself and Liz. Thank you so much for the time. And yeah, thank you for just sharing some insights.